Of course, we're working with them in order to ensure that it is, and it's certainly not unachievable. What we're talking about is an expansion of facilities at Larne and the provision of new facilities at Belfast Port, which are certainly not unachievable. I would deny that the timescale is challenging, but certainly not unachievable.
Okay, well, that is it. Will the falsified medicines directive still apply in Northern Ireland for the 1st of January? And if so, will there have to be checks on medicines entering Northern Ireland from Great Britain?
The directive, as we understand it, will apply, but we are working to make sure that there won't be restrictions of the kind which some have drawn attention to and which are naturally a concern for us. That is a matter that we're addressing at the moment, both in conversations with the EU and internally.
Have you asked, for example, for a derogation from the directive covering the movement of medicines from GB to Northern Ireland? Have you requested that?
There are a number of steps that we're taking. We haven't asked for a formal derogation, but we're discussing with the EU what we can do, and we're also looking at what our own domestic contingencies might be. Would
one way of making the problem less difficult be a derogation?
Some sort of phasing approach, yes, would be a possibility.
That's extremely helpful. Right, I move now to Nigel Mills. Nigel.
Thank you. Michael, it would be probably remiss of me not to ask you my usual question at these sessions of how confident of successfully achieving a deal are you? Is it still 66%, or are you now much lower than that?
No, I think that the number might have oscillated upwards or downwards since the last time we spoke, Nigel, but I would say that's about right.
Mr. Frost, you concur with that assessment, given you're doing the negotiations?
I think that a deal is eminently achievable and could be achieved, but equally it is possible that we won't get there, and we'll have to see what the next few weeks bring.
Make a politician with an answer like that. Well, can I just turn back to the question of goods moving to Northern Ireland, which we exchanged discussions about last time as well, Michael. In terms of trying to agree goods at risk, are you kind of optimistic that that's agreeable at the Joint Committee, or do you think we're going to have to unilaterally decide that between now and the end of the year?
I think we can agree it. I hope that we will. And so far, the approach that's been taken by the EU, well, in particular by Vice President Shevchevich, has been pragmatic and reasonable. Of course, he's discussing on behalf of the whole EU, but his whole approach is very constructive. So I am hopeful.
And have you put forward proposals that you could share with us for what you'd be happy with as a definition of goods at risk, or is that a private negotiating matter?
The negotiation is covered by confidentiality, and I do have to respect the confidentiality of the EU's position as well as our own, but our approach was outlined in the command paper that we published earlier this year. And again, we're pretty clear that as far as we're concerned, it has to be a pretty high bar that has to be crossed to prove that a good is at risk.
So it'd be safe for traders in Northern Ireland to assume, or traders in the UK to assume that it would be very few goods that would need to have declarations and tariffs paid. It would be the real exception to the rule, not the rule.
That's the approach that we're taking, given that there is much more trade from Great Britain to Northern Ireland and vice versa than there is between Northern Ireland and the Republic.
In terms of goods coming from Northern Ireland into the mainland, is it the government's position that whatever the negotiation, there'll be no fetters on that, so there'll be no declarations, there'll be no need to buy information other than perhaps some small stuff around food or agricultural goods or something like that? There'll be no need to do anything at all?
There are some specific exceptions for international law, things like blood diamonds as a result of the Kimberley process, and also CITES, trade in endangered species. But otherwise, we don't envisage there being restrictions, and we made it clear that, for example, summary declarations should not be required.
And that is something you need to negotiate with the EU, or we'll just bring into force by the internal market bill or the finance bill or whatever we need to do. There'll be literally nothing that will have to be declared anywhere electronically or paper form to move most goods from Northern Ireland.
The EU are very clear about our position. The UK internal market bill is there as a safety net, but I'm hopeful that we will reach a pragmatic recognition on the part of the EU that unfettered access has to be delivered in a way that Northern Ireland businesses and citizens would probably understand.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Nigel. Now to Gove.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Gove, do you agree that requiring export declarations for products moving from Northern Ireland to GB would mitigate against the commitment both the EU and the UK made to guarantee unfettered access? And could you explain what role they could play in policing the EU single market when they relate to goods leaving, not entering?
You're absolutely spot on, Gary. I can't see, and to be fair, I think the Chair made this point in the Commons itself, that there's any requirement for ex-summary declaration, as you quite rightly point out. It doesn't have any impact on the integrity of the EU single market. If a good travels from Belfast to Glasgow or Cardiff or London, so it would be an unnecessarily fundamental interpretation of the Union Customs Code.
And what do you understand to be the purpose of export declarations?
Well, again, the EU would require them because it wants to maintain the integrity of its single market. But here we're talking about goods moving from one part of the United Kingdom to the other. And so, one of the reasons why the Joint Committee exists is that the application of the Union Customs Code and other provisions within the protocol are applying in a unique set of circumstances in Northern Ireland. The protocol makes clear the requirement for unfettered access, and also the very existence of the Joint Committee it's more than that. It's an incarnation of the fact that these issues do need to be resolved because the protocol itself contains ambiguity.
Thank you. And do you agree that a situation in which tariffs applied on all goods moving into Northern Ireland as a result of a failure to reach agreement in the Joint Committee would be an obvious breach of the requirement under the protocol to keep any impact on the lives on the communities in Northern Ireland to a minimum?
Yes. 100%.
Thank you. Very succinct, thank you. In your opinion, probably for both of you to answer please, has the UK Internal Market Bill impacted negatively on the negotiations as far as you see it so far?
It's certainly the case that actors in the European Union have expressed their opposition to provisions within the bill, but the facts of the matter are that the Joint Committee has met since then and is due to meet again in the future. The specialised committees carry on with their work, and Lord Frost is carrying on with his work in the negotiations.
Yes, nothing to add really. I think they are on separate tracks, and certainly in my side of the negotiations, there is determination on both sides to keep this moving forward.
Okay, thank you. And the last question I have, Chairman, is how will Her Majesty's Government be responding to the formal notice sent by the European Union Commission?
We accept and understand the reasons why that communication was sent, and in the meantime, we're seeking through the Joint Committee and through the other negotiations which David leads to ensure that the need for any legal action on the part of the EU disappears.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. I now turn to Barry Shearman. Barry.
Secretary of State, Michael, and my Lord, could I ask you a question? I know that you've done a worst-case scenario, and I know that caused some concern. Could I appeal to you, as like all of us, we want the least possible disruption as we get to the end of the year and to the January the 1st dramatic change in all our lives. But is there not a nightmare scenario? We didn't realise that the COVID-19 will be coming back as strongly as it has. And every indication this winter is going to be bad for the COVID, worse than perhaps last year, that we are going to be in a situation where there might be a flu epidemic. There might be dreadful weather December going into January. Is there a possibility, if there was that nightmare conjunction of all the evil forces, is there a way, is there a fallback position that we could have some hesitation rather than have everything go wrong?
I entirely understand your question, Barry, and I just say three things very quickly. The scenario that we published is a reasonable worst case scenario, and one of the reasons for publishing it was to try to encourage business to let us know what more we could do to help it become ready. And if everyone takes appropriate steps, government most of all, then I think that we can mitigate many of the concerns that the reasonable worst case scenario crystallises. The second thing is that any delay in the end of the transition period, I think, would work against everyone's interests. And the Leader of the Opposition and the Labour Front Bench are now clear that it would be wrong to go for an extension of the transition period. And on the third point about COVID and flu and so on, I think you're absolutely right, and I hope that you'll be encouraging other colleagues in the House of Commons to support the government in any measures that it may take forward next week in order to ensure that we can continue to fight the disease effectively.
Michael, you would know that I would be supporting anything that would save lives and stop the infection spreading. But can I push you? I've been rooting around a little bit in Kent, and I have been talking to some Kent local authority people. They are a bit concerned about what the preparations on the ground. And they feel that they've been rather pushed around by the central government, that they are going to get the blame when these car parks aren't finished, when the customs buildings aren't ready, whether they're temporary or they're permanent. There is a real feeling of discontent that they're not ready and they are going to be blamed. Are you talking to local authorities? Because whether it's COVID or whether it's leaving the European Union, it's those local authorities who are going to bear the brunt of the hard work.
Yes, I absolutely take your point, Barry, and we do work with local authorities. Representatives from the Kent Resilience Forum and Kent County Council joined the Cabinet Committee that deals with these matters, EXO, on Monday. I have to say that the Kent Police, Kent County Council, under its brilliant leader Roger Goff and others, have worked incredibly hard. If things do go wrong, then to paraphrase Rag and Bone Man, put the blame on me.
Could I, my last question, Michael, is this, and that is the evidence that we took from the port authorities and really very good people who know about customs, all were very worried. Road Haulage Association, I know you've had some history with them, but what about the rest of the country? Everything seems to be, Dover, Kent centric. What about preparations for all the other very large ports all around our coast that are so vital to our exports and our imports? Why there is, I can understand the concentration because of London and Dover, but the evidence that we took as a committee, I kept chiding them in a way. What about the rest of the country? How are the preparations there in that nightmare scenario of a bad winter that I described earlier?
Again, a very good point. Obviously, we're concentrating on Dover Cali because the short straits are responsible for the majority of roll-on, roll-off traffic between the UK and the EU. But we've also launched a port infrastructure fund with £200 million worth of support, and that support is both going to other ports on site and also helping to support the creation of inland sites. And again, one of the things that we've done, taking account of COVID, is to make it clear that some of the import processes that would ordinarily have been required were phasing in, and they won't come into play until the 1st of July 2021. Now, obviously the EU is at the moment maintaining the principle that they will have all the checks that may be required for a third country operating from the 1st of January, but everything that we can do, we are doing, and of course, I'm always grateful when individual ports or organisations like the RHA and others get in touch, because we benefit from their close understanding of what requires to be done in order to allow trade to flow smoothly.
Michael, okay. You sound very optimistic. Thank you. I see that Michelle and Michael have come to an entente.
For God's sake.
I hope that's the case.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Barry. I'm now turning to Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Mr. Gove, on the 11th of March this year, you told this committee and I quote, that the subsidy regime that the UK proposes to put in place after we've left the European Union will be one that the European Union recognise as a robust system. So I'm wondering whether the EU see the Business Secretary's recent announcement that the UK will follow WTO rules. Do they recognise that as a robust state aid subsidy system?
I think all fair-minded people would recognise that it was robust. But if I may, I'll just pass the baton to Lord Frost briefly. And of course, I'm more than happy to come back to answer your question, Joe. But I know that it's Lord Frost who is in the negotiations. There's not much that he can say about the detail, but he can say a little bit more about the principle.
Yes, thanks, CDL. So just briefly, one of the things the EU have been asking for some time was clarity about the future and how we intended to handle the subsidy regime after the end of this year. And that statement was intended to provide clarity that we will move to an administrative regime next year based on the WTO and any free trade agreements that we sign between now and then. And then we will consult and, if necessary, have legislation. Now, they definitely, I'm sure, would have wished for something sort of firmer and clearer from us, but that is the difference between us in the negotiations. And we, what's at stake at the moment is a discussion on precisely that point. What is the level of assurance we might be able to give in the future agreements about the shape of our future subsidy regime? And unfortunately, the gap is still quite wide, though maybe not quite as wide as it was a couple of months ago.
Thank you. The reason I ask is it's been reported that some EU officials see this announcement as perpetuating uncertainty. And one EU official said that the lack of detail in this announcement wouldn't sink the talks on a trade deal, but it was in itself provocative. Do you recognise those comments?
Well, I remember the comments, if that's what you mean, from the media at the time. I don't think they're very fair, to be honest, because, as I say, we had been asked for some time to provide clarity, and that's what that statement intended to do. The statement wasn't a treaty. It is not a legal text. It's not going to do the same thing as a legal text, but it did set out how we were going to handle it in future. And it was intended to make clear that there would be a regime. There would be an administrative regime in the short run and probably something more robust further down the line. And I think that was clear and it's achieved the purpose.
I mean, I note that you recognise that there will probably have to be something more robust further down the line. Isn't it the case that experts in this area have said that falling back on WTO rules doesn't actually work as a subsidy control regime? It's not a subsidy control regime, it's just a stopgap, isn't it?
Well, I'm not sure I would entirely agree with that because a number of other countries around the world do have a regime that is based principally on WTO rules plus free trade agreements plus administrative guidance. Now, every country is different and has to frame it in the light of their own sort of traditions. But actually, if you look globally, it's the EU regime that's an outlier, really, with its ex-ante policing and quite rigid rules. That's inevitable. They're policing a regime of 27 countries. Obviously, they have to do it in a different way. The political economy of it is different. We will be out of that at the end of the transition period, and we can do it differently in a way that is more sort of internationally normal, I would say. But that is the debate that we'll have to have in the consultation next year.
I've read and I heard you talk about it with the Lords this afternoon that your new legal text on state aid, it sets out a series of principles. I think you said high-level principles on controlling domestic subsidies. Can you give us a flavour of what those high-level principles are?
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously we're in a negotiation, so there's a limit to the kind of detail I can give. But first point is that it is unusual to give any detail in a free trade agreement at all about the shape of the subsidy agreement. We're already making a significant move towards the EU's concerns in being willing to include.
But you have that in the UK-Japan deal, though, don't you?
There are some very, very limited provisions, but you're right. Some of the more recent trade agreements do include some very limited provisions, and of course, UK-Japan is copied over from EU-Japan as a transition agreement. What we sought to do in this new text is just make clear some of the things that a good subsidy regime has to do. If subsidies are granted, they're on public policy grounds, they're proportionate, what you're doing is open and transparent, they're aimed to sort of bring about a change in behaviour rather than perpetuating a situation, and that they're the right instrument to achieve the end. And
no, Frost, I'm sorry to interrupt you, I do apologise, but we are going to need to move on.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Joanna. Turn to Jane Stevenson. Jane.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Gove and Mr. Frost. I'd like to turn to fisheries, where we seem to have been stuck between a rock and a hard place for some time. Your new legal text, shared with the EU this week, reportedly offers a transition period for EU fishermen. Could you briefly outline how a transition period would work?
Well, once again, I don't want to go into the detail of this. The problem that we face and the opportunity that we have with fishing in future is that the EU fish nearly half the fish in our waters at the moment, and we've made clear that there needs to be a huge change in that situation in future. And that's something we intend to secure. Now, obviously, there's going to be an effect on EU fishing communities from that, and it seems entirely reasonable to us that provided the end point is one that we wish to get to, that there could be some glide path to get there. There are quite significant limits to what can be done there, because our fishermen are eager to grasp the opportunities, but we are trying to find a way of dealing with what's sort of politically realistic and possible here. So that is the underlying principle that's behind that, and why we have indicated it could be potentially be part of any solution.
Thank you. Do you feel that a transition period would be acceptable to many of our fishermen in coastal communities who voted to leave 4 years ago?
Well, once again, I don't want to get into the detail. We remain in very close touch with the fishing associations about the course of the negotiations, and I don't think we would wish to conclude an agreement that didn't satisfy the reasonable expectations of UK fishermen. So that is the way we approach this, and I don't want to sort of comment in further detail, as there are lots of moving parts in this negotiation that's going on, but that's our very broad approach, and I think it's what you would expect at this stage.
And Mr. Gove, do you find a transition period an acceptable area of compromise?
Well, as Lord Frost pointed out, I think that it's important to recognise that in voting to take back control, we voted to take back control of our, not just our territorial waters, but our exclusive economic zone. But I don't want to go into any more detail than Lord Frost has, but I know that he is a very robust negotiator with a very clear understanding of the importance of getting things right for our fishing communities.
Thank you. Have the EU responded to proposals for a transition period yet?
Well, we're in constant discussions about fishing and the other outstanding issues. So yes, we're in discussions on that and the other elements that might form part of the fisheries deal.
Thank you. Can you give us some examples of where there has been some flexibility, both in the EU's position and in our position, from the two very opposed starting points?
Well, I think there are, as I said, there are a number of moving parts in this discussion, and one of them is transition, which we talked about. Another is obviously the quota numbers, and I think it would probably be wrong of me at this point to give much detail on that, given that this is a negotiation in progress and trying to get the best outcome we possibly can over the next couple of weeks. So I would rather not give full detail at this point for reasons of negotiating confidentiality, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you. And finally, one of our very firm lines was to negotiate annually quota for fishing in our waters. Will that be something that we compromise on, or is that still our firm commitment?
It's a very fundamental point for us that there must be annual negotiations on access to UK waters. That's not quite the same thing as quota shares, which can be more durable, but there must be annual negotiations on the total allowable capture, how that's interpreted through the quotas and access to waters, and that's an absolutely fundamental point in this for us.
Thank you. And extra finally, can I just ask what your percentage chances of a deal? How do you feel it's looking for an agreement on fisheries specifically?
On fisheries is the most difficult issue remaining, in my view. I think we've been clear about that, but I would not want to suggest that any issue can't be solved, and we're working hard, as hard as we can, to try and solve it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Jane, the floor now passes to Sally-Ann Hart. Sally-Ann.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, gentlemen. Just sort of taking up on Jane's point there, I would make a plea to keep our 0 to 12 mile zone sacrosanct for British fishermen. I make that plea desperately.
Yes.
So we hear that the EU has rejected the UK's proposals on a range of subjects, including rules of origin, access to criminal databases, such as the Schengen Information System, road haulage, and roll-on, roll-off freight. Why do you think the UK proposals have been rejected in this way? And have they?
So I think that just on your first point, 0 to 12 nautical miles, we are on 100% the same line, so don't worry about that. That is part of our position. On why the EU has rejected certain positions. Once again, I think I'd prefer not to go into detail on all of them, because I don't know that they have necessarily definitively rejected everything, and negotiations are ongoing. For example, on road haulage, there's definitely a constructive negotiation continuing. The parameters changing a little bit, but I still feel we can get a good road haulage agreement out of this. If I could just pick on one, which was the Schengen Information System, though, because I think that it is known that the EU takes a firm view that it's not legally possible for a non-member, non-Schengen country to join that, and that's a pity. They made that clear right from the start, and it appears to be a constraint. So we have been looking at alternatives. But that appears to be a firm part of the landscape. Other areas, I think there is a negotiation ongoing, and we continue to think good outcomes might be possible.
Okay, so for things like the Schengen Information System, you'd be looking at some separate agreement for something like that. Yes. So looking at road haulage and trucking access and roll on and roll off, bearing in mind that it's important to keep trade moving to and from the Republic of Ireland to the rest of the UK, as well as to the EU, as well as from the UK to the EU and beyond. Some of the proposals, such as for the trucking access, road haulage and roll-on, roll-off, do go beyond recent EU deals with third countries such as Canada and Japan. Is this for a practical reason, because of our geographic location? Would you expect the EU to offer different, better terms to us than they have done with the other countries?
I think that's a very important point, and one thing it's really important to keep in mind is that this is much more than a pure free trade agreement. This agreement is huge in breadth, and as well as trade, covers road haulage, air transport, energy, social security, law enforcement, and so on. It's much broader, and it's inevitable that, as you say, for geography reasons and others, there simply aren't precedents around the world. There are good precedents for free trade agreements. There aren't necessarily good precedents for road haulage agreements, and so inevitably we've had to tailor those to the specific environment. We have made proposals on roll-on, roll-off ferries to sort of facilitate customs and other processes, and those are still in the mix, and we hope for a good outcome on those. Road haulage, as I say, is still an ongoing negotiation. There is obviously a particular issue about the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland and managing that in this agreement, and that's very much part of the outcomes we're hoping to achieve.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Sally Ann. I now turn to Peter Bowe. Peter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first question is to Lord Frost. Have the EU negotiators said to you that there must be a specific date by which the Comprehensive Free Trade Agreement, if it's going to be made, is made?
They have not said authoritatively, as it were, that there is a specific date. I think in negotiators' minds and in ours, there's a good understanding of what might be possible, because everyone can see the timescale that's necessary to ratify any agreement in the UK, in Parliament, prepare the text, translate, and so on. So those constraints are there. I think we have said, the Prime Minister has said something quite clear about how we see the time frame. The EU might have a slightly different view, but not materially, I would say, about the urgency.
Could we turn to the British position then? I think I'm right in saying that the Prime Minister indicated the 15th of October was the sort of final date. Is that correct?
Well, yes, you've seen his statement that he made on the 7th of September. We have been working hard for an agreement since then. We'd obviously prefer to have one, but if we can't get one, we will trade on Australia terms and prosper, and that is very clear, fundamental to the way we are looking at this. I don't think I have much to add to what the Prime Minister says at this stage. My job is to get as far as we can before the 15th, and then I'll have to advise the PM as to whether the conditions for an agreement, the basis for an agreement, are in place at that point, and what happens thereafter. It is really important, as CDL was saying, that we try and bring some certainty to stakeholders, given the imminence of the end of the transition period and all the preparations that need to be done. And that's very much on our minds when we look at the timescale.
I was going to move on to that, Lord Frost. I mean, ever since really the EU referendum, business has been saying to me that what they want is certainty of what's going to happen. Of course, they would prefer, as I think everyone would, a comprehensive free trade agreement. But they would work to whatever rules are agreed. But they need to have that certainty. So I suppose one way of looking at it would be, do you have a date by which, if negotiations aren't going to move forward, you say, I'm sorry, we just can't do this. We must give our businesses notice that we are going to trade on the Australian system from the end of the year?
Well, the Prime Minister has said what he has said on that subject, and that is our sort of authoritative statement of the position. I would just add that he did say in that our door is never closed, that even if we conclude collectively that a free trade agreement is not possible, there's obviously quite a lot of practical issues we will need to discuss. We will still need to come to some sort of arrangements about flights and road haulage and other things. And I imagine we'd want to go on talking after that, because that's just the realities of the situation, and the Prime Minister was clear about that. But as to the framing of the timescale and significance of dates, I think at this point there's nothing to add beyond his statement, and we will have to take a view when the 15th approaches, which is quite soon.
Could I just go and ask you, Secretary of State, because I'm pleased that everyone is in optimistic mood about a comprehensive free trade agreement. That is really good news for everyone. And look, the 15th of October is penciled in to seem to be the date for it to be signed. But could you do me a favour, Secretary of State? My birthday is the 19th of October, and it will be a really wonderful birthday present for me if you could sign the agreement on the 19th of October. Do you think there's any chance of that?
Well, I think that making sure that birthday celebrations in the Bone household can be even more effective this year than in previous years has to be a top priority. But we're doing everything we can to try to secure agreement. But to return to another very important point you made with respect to business readiness, businesses should know that much of what they require to do will be the same whether or not we secure an FTA, because whether or not we do secure a Canada-style FTA, which is our shared aim, or leave without a negotiated outcome, the so-called Australian outcome, then businesses will have to do very similar things in order to prepare, because in any case, we'll be outside the single market and the customs union.
Chairman, thank you very much. Now that I can safely prepare my birthday celebrations, I have no further questions.
Well, thank you very much, Peter, for that. We now turn to Rupa Haq. Rupa.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, good evening, chaps. Congratulations, Your Lordship, on your elevation. The Secretary of State quoted Rag and Bone Man. I think this is more of an M&M cleaning out the closet type of question of some loose ends that need tying up. So first of all, how many lorry parks will we need by the 1st of January? And have you decided where to build them?
Well, I think it's important to recognise that there are different types of border facilities. So when we're thinking about lorry parks, we're thinking particularly about the prospect of disruption at the border between GB and EU in Kent. It is the case that we have a chance to use the facility at Manston as part of our preparations to ensure that we can continue to have a good flow of traffic. Many of the other infrastructure sites which have been designated by some as lorry parks are not that. They are, for example, transit sites, or they serve other purposes.
So just the Kent one as an actual lorry park, you're saying?
Well, again, I think it's important to draw a distinction between sites that exist in order to help manage traffic flow in the event that there is traffic disruption, and then sites which have another function. For example, they act as offices of departure, or they provide other specific customs or related functions.
So there's different categories of them. Yes. How many have you started building? How many are complete now?
Well, we have a number of sites that are already complete. North Weald, Epsley and others which have been prepared in the past. Ashford Sevington, the former Mojo site, is one where work is well advanced. And of course there will be some facilities that will only be required from July of next year because they relate to import requirements, not export requirements.
On the 12th of June, it was on the gov.uk website, it's been in the Financial Times, that a major programme was announced, a £50 million package for intermediate customs sector, including training new customs officers. I just wondered, how many of these customs agents have been trained under that programme?
Well, the money's been made available to private sector actors, and they've drawn down a significant amount of that £50 million, but not yet all. But by definition, because you have a fluid market, we don't know how each individual actor within the marketplace has responded, but there is a significant market opportunity because, as I mentioned earlier to Mr. Bone, once we're outside the single market and the customs union, then businesses will require either in-house or through a freight forwarder or customs intermediary the capacity to fulfill new processes. So again, a lot will depend on the individual decisions that companies take about whether or not they increase their in-house capacity or seek to outsource the delivery of this service.
I mean, because in that same announcement, it said 50,000 new ones are needed. So I just wondered how many of those will be ready for the 1st of January. If it's going to the private sector, presumably there's some oversight, someone is monitoring this.
Well, it would be the private sector anyway. These are functions in the market. But the 50,000 figure is, like so many of them, a guesstimate. But 1,400 organisations have already applied to draw down funds from the support that we provide.
So we don't know exactly how many ready. And then just what IT systems?
Well, indeed, one of the things is that there are a million daily interactions in the market, and by definition, this was the thesis of Friedrich Heyst's Road to Serfdom, that no government can understand at any given time what all those market interactions are. If we did attempt to second-guess every single action by every market player, then we'd be going down, I think, an unhappy route.
I was just imagining it might be like the fast route stream where there's an intake and they're making their way through and they'll be ready, but okay, it's not that.
Like the what, sorry?
Like the fast stream, the traditional civil service thing for...
They're not civil servants, that's the point.
Okay. And then just the IT systems that need to be put in place. The Chair was mentioning this at the start. How confident are you that those will be ready by the 1st of January? And which IT systems are they?
Well, there are a range of IT systems. Some of them are already in place. So we touched on Smart Freight, or the system which enables you to check whether or not your HGV is ready for the border. And we also touched on GVMS. But there are a number of other systems, from chiefly being HMRC system to IPAS, which is the replacement for traces, and so on.
And you're confident they'll all be ready by the 1st of January?
The majority are.
Okay.
Already.
Sounds like a Gary Lineker eat your shorts moment.
Eat your what?
Shorts. Well, remember, he said he was so confident that was it Leicester wouldn't win the league, that he would eat his shorts. But yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Well, I think Leicester did win the league, didn't they?
Yeah.
They did, but I think we'll pass on from that. Rupert, thank you very much for your questions. And now Mark Eastwood. Mark.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for coming today. I want to follow on from Barry Shearman, and I know, Mr. Gove, I've asked you at earlier meetings for assurances that the transition period would not be extended due to the coronavirus. Are there any circumstances at all where there could be an extension beyond the 1st of January? Say we were getting near to a deal but not quite over the line. Are there any circumstances?
No.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. That's quite very encouraging. So as we approach the end date, as we get near to the end date, I'm getting contacted by quite a large number of people. Mainly, I have to say that those that oppose Brexit, via email, on social media, asking me what the benefits of leaving the EU are. Mr. Gove, could you outline the benefits in details to those that have been in contact and to the majority of my constituents in Dewsbury who voted leave? What are the benefits of leaving the EU?
Well, I think we've only got 10 minutes left in this session, so I'm not sure that I can list them all. But the first would be that we would take back control of our borders. We can have a points-based system for migration, which means that we can have the brightest and the best. We can have a bias, for example, towards those scientists who can play such a big role in improving our response to pandemics and meeting the challenges of the future, while at the same time making sure that we have confidence in our migration system because we control our borders. It will be the case that we'll be able to make our own laws and regulations at a time when many have reflected on the fact that the EU's approach towards innovation has often been driven by economic protectionism rather than embrace of science, and setting our own regulatory framework in those areas will mean that the fourth industrial revolution and the new opportunities it brings can be better exploited here in the UK? Will we in control of our own trade policy? And that means not just the opportunity for freer trade with other nations across the globe, and a chance to, as Liz Truss has done, conclude better arrangements with Japan than those that we had inside the EU applying to other countries, but we can also play our part in the CPTPP and other international fora. It is the case already that we can take an approach on sanctions and human rights, which is more progressive than the EU has taken. The recent actions by Dominic Raab's Foreign Secretary by introducing sanctions against Russia and Belarus in tandem with Canada and others have shown that we can be a progressive figure on the world stage outside the European Union. It's also the case that we can take back control of our fishing waters, our exclusive economic zone. That means not just because communities can get more jobs, it also means that we can manage our marine environment in a more sensitive way. We can replace the wasteful, inefficient and anti-environmental regime of the Common Agricultural Policy by making sure that our farmers are in a stronger position, not just to export, but to make sure that our soil restores its carbon content and that we are investing in environmental benefits. It is also the case that we will be able to have a more accountable political system. One of the main concerns I think that many people had during our time in the European Union is that the European Union had 5 presidents, none of whom anyone in the UK had directly voted for. Now we have direct parliamentary accountability. The greatest symbol of democracy is not the ballot box, it's the removal ban. And when you vote to remove a prime minister, you know outside the European Union that means that policy can change. One of the problems that we had inside the European Union is that on many issues that were dear to the hearts of voters in Dewsbury and beyond, we weren't able to alter course. And that means, again, that our politics should become healthier. In the past, there was a hiding place for politicians who would say, well, I'd like to change the rules there, but I'm afraid I can't because of the EU. I think that undermines confidence in democracy and in elected politicians, and it will be another advantage that comes about as a result of being outside the European Union. I think it's also the case that outside the EU, as Lord Frost has pointed out, we can have a state aid or subsidy regime which is responsive, which is in keeping with our broad free market principles, but also enables us to make the change that we want to make to support our agenda of what's been called levelling up. On top of that, we can establish new free ports. Free ports are opportunities not just to change the economic geography of the United Kingdom, but also to stimulate investment in a way which will drive the level of innovation that our other changes will bring. And I'll stop just there.
Thank you, Mr. Gove, for a very comprehensive response to that question. Can I turn...
And of course, we'll also get back the money that we give to the European Union. I should have mentioned that. We give more than £20 billion to the EU every year. We get back less than half that. The EU directs how that money is spent. We could now spend that money on our own priorities like the NHS, as well as the UK Shared Prosperity Fund.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for that. Can I turn to you, Lord Frost? In your statement after the 9th round of negotiations, you said that discussions were conducted in good spirits. However, during the previous negotiation stages, both the EU and the UK have been accused of negotiating in bad faith. What would you say to that?
I don't think either side has negotiated in bad faith. I think we are both trying to get an agreement. I think some forceful things have been said at some point in these negotiations, and obviously some of that has come out in recent weeks in connection with other issues. But I think generally we've established a good rapport, taking account of the fact that the coronavirus has made it more difficult to meet and establish kind of informal connections than we normally would. I'm confident that these are constructive discussions, and we're aiming to get an agreement if we possibly can. But there's some really difficult stuff in there that is not yet resolved.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Mark. Can I just ask you, Lord Frost, I think you said to the Lords Committee earlier today that a dispute resolution mechanism on state aid would be a good thing, and that the UK would want to make use of that as much as the EU side would. Presumably, that would need to include an arbitration mechanism if by negotiation you couldn't resolve a particular dispute. Is that part of the government's objectives?
Well, Once again, I don't want to sort of go into the detail of everything we are discussing. One of the issues, as I said to the Lords Committee, is the scope of arbitration across this agreement. And normally, arbitration is, covers some areas and not others. That's sort of fairly standard. I think the point I was trying to make on subsidy state aid is that whatever the final agreement, whatever the form of dispute settlement on subsidy state aid, I could imagine we will be at least as assiduous users of it as the EU would be.
And do you presumably envisage an arbitration system where, if the two parties can't agree, the arbitration mechanism and the arbitrators would decide one way or the other who was right?
Well, it's precisely because of that feature of arbitration that it is so sensitive in certain areas, and the EU, in its text in March this year, it emerged did not want to make certain aspects sensitive to it, subject to arbitration, and we're likely to do the same. And I think what we're trying to do in the next couple of weeks is find balance between those two things.
Okay, and just finally from me before we run out of time, what percentage of the various objectives that the government set out in its February 2020 document, which was a very long list, the trade agreement and then other agreements, we touched on fisheries, aviation, energy, mobility, social security, nuclear cooperation, law enforcement, asylum, and so on and so forth. If there is an agreement, if you can unlock the remaining items that you have spoken about as being as yet unresolved, what percentage of the areas of agreement that the government was hoping would come out of this will be wrapped up in this, and how much will be left for continuing beyond the 1st of September?
I think I've seen the percentages attributed to me in the past, the last couple of months, which I don't recognise on this. So, and I'm always very cautious about using percentage figures. I think if we're able to reach an agreement, and I'd say that's an open question, though we're trying, it's going to be a very broad agreement, and it will cover most, I would say, of the areas that were set out in our mandate document back in February, and that's never really been in dispute, and I'm confident if we can reach an agreement at all, it will be a very broad-based one and will be in our interests, most importantly.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I think that brings us to the end of our time. Could I say to you, Mr. Gove, and also Lord Frost, has been some time since we heard from you, and we respected your need to keep today's discussion for an hour. Colleagues would like to ask questions. And I hope you could give us a firm commitment to come back to us in the near future when, well, we're clear one way or the other whether there is an agreement or not, because whatever the outcome, we will need to scrutinise in our work the consequences for the country and for business. And I hope you would be able to give us that commitment today, so we don't have to wait another 4 months. I know you've both been extremely busy, but it's very important for the committee to do its work, given that today's time has been.
Understood, and of course, in due course, we will definitely come back. Thank you very much. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thanks to both of you for giving evidence today. Order, order. Right, that's it.
Portcullis House, the Boothroyd Room. Portcullis House, the Boothroyd Room. Portcullis House, the Boothroyd Room. Portcullis House, the Boothroyd Room.